Welcome to our webinar. We're so grateful to have Kat and Kaela here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Also grateful to have Entrada host these Tech for Good sessions that we're doing on a monthly basis. But today we're going to be talking about what listening means, or I guess the title is leadership, listening and leadership. And I think we have some really fantastic people that I have known for a long time and respect in this community to share their thoughts and advice here. But we'll go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves. Kaela, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Kaela. I've been in the tech industry for just over a decade, I think. I've worked in marketing and product and B2B companies, B2C. I've done companies with hundreds of millions of users like Reddit, and really high growth companies like Podium, and then 0 to 1 companies like IMSI, a company I started previously. And then most recently, I am starting a new company called Paintbrush. And we are working on helping founders of their own companies get funding easier when they are at the idea stage. So really excited to be here and talk about the lessons I've learned along the way, and some things I probably screwed up so that hopefully other people can have it a little bit easier.
Great. Thanks, Kaela. Kat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm Kat. I usually don't sound like this. For some reason, my voice decided to leave me this morning. But I am a general partner at Kickstart, one of 5, and so happy to be a part of this amazing community. Prior to joining Kickstart, I was president and CXO of another venture-backed startup here in Utah called Degrade.
So, kind of fun fact, Kat and I worked out of the same incubator space at SLCC. This would have been in 2014.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we rode the elevator together at some point or another, but we didn't really know each other until we did a TV segment, a news segment. And then Kaela, I feel like we've been really adjacent in a lot of because I know people from IMSI and Reddit and the things that you've done here with Podium. I hear nothing but wonderful things, and I'm really excited that you and Stephen Walter are doing Paintbrush, because I think it's such a needed, as a previous founder, it's something that is really needed in the market. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of jump into some questions. Feel free to write your comments in the chat, and we'll address these questions at the end. But let's just start. What does leadership mean to you guys? And this is a question for both of you, and I'd love for you to not only when you talk about what a leader is, can you give some examples of good leaders that you've had in your career? Kat, do you want to go first on that?
I thought Kaela was going to get to go first.
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to. What is leadership? It's that people lead, which I think often gets lost. We see it as management or executives, right? But ultimately, politicians even, but ultimately I think leadership can be a part of any individual's life as long as they are leading, which means you're venturing out ahead of the pack and often showing them the way in which to walk or supporting them as they do so. I've been lucky to work for some incredible leaders, leaders of very different profiles as well. David Blake, a visionary founder in Degreed, has gone on to found more companies, and now he's back at Degreed at the growth stage. He taught me so much about being a leader, and that he's so principled. It was always easy to anticipate what Dave was going to do, because you know what he values, you know his principles, and therefore you can anticipate his behavior. And that's something that I very much admire and hope to emulate. Another amazing leader I was able to work for is Chris McCarthy. He is as competitive as any human I've ever known and wants to win. And what he did so well was he created a team and coached a team that could win. So his ability to delegate and to find others who were exceptional and support them in being such, I really, really admired. But ultimately, what is leadership? It's leading and supporting others in doing so.
Yep. And I think that support is, it's not just paving the way, but actually helping the team come along. I think is really important. Kayla, what about you? Talk about what leadership means to you, and what are some of the good examples of leaders that you've had in your career?
Yeah, I think that, good leadership comes down to a few different things. One of the key things that Kat mentioned, is you need to help people know where you're going. You need to be able to really set a clear vision that allows people to see the path in front of them and get really excited about that. If they are passionate about the vision of your company or your product, or just your individual team, they're going to want to work hard and figure out how to make your goals happen. And so making sure that they understand why you're working on what you're doing is critical, and getting everyone involved in that is one of the biggest things you can do. So vision is really critical. Helping set clear expectations of what success looks like is really, really important. A lot of times people, are trying to work towards something, but they don't know exactly how to accomplish that and if they're doing well or not. And so it's hard to feel satisfied in your job if you don't know if you're doing well. And then it's hard to know if it can be discouraging if your boss comes in and says you're not doing well at something. But if you set really clear expectations, then people know when to ask for help. They know when to reach out. They know, when they're doing great. And so setting those clear expectations is really helpful. And then being able to, create that space of collaboration and trust among your team members is really, really critical, where people know they can be themselves. They can express ideas that they might not be confident in. They can be vulnerable. All of that is really, really powerful for allowing others to collaborate effectively. So I think that those pieces allows the team to work as effectively as possible and overcome any issues that might come up, or to come up with really new and interesting ideas that they otherwise wouldn't if they don't know where you're going, or if they don't have the confidence to speak up about ideas or ask the right questions.
You bring up an interesting point, Kayla. And I know you've focused a lot of your career on building products, which is, you're listening to users, you're listening to, your team, you're listening to the market, you're listening to investors sometimes, and help guiding that. But when that requires a lot of listening, but you talked about like when, getting everybody's kind of more buy-in. How do you also listen and get buy-in at the same time? Because it's almost like those can be sometimes competing.
Yeah, I think that they're actually not competing at all. Sometimes they seem like it, but listening is a prerequisite to getting buy-in. And so, for example, when you are trying to convince somebody that you want them to do something your way, or you think somebody's idea is bad. I've had this tons of times when I, have either managed employees or just had team members, and I thought that their idea of how to build something or what we should build was terrible. And if you just try to convince them, like, let's do it this way, they're going to be resistant because you don't understand their ideas in the first place. And so it always starts with asking questions, whether it's your boss, your employee, or a coworker. And so being able to say, okay, tell me more about that. Or like, even just, being able to validate your employee and saying like, I can see you've thought a lot about this, or I'd love to hear more about how you approach this. Being able to ask those things allows them to express the thinking behind how they got there. And then, making sure, I love being able to use like these tactics of like summarizing, mirroring, labeling, being able to say like, okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like we want to do this, or like, you think we should X, and just like repeating back their like last 3 words. And then, or it sounds like your primary goal concern is X and like labeling that. And once you do that, then you can establish everything that you have in common, and then they feel heard. And then you can be like, cool, okay, so if our goal is this, what if we tried this? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, that's great. And you know that you're on the same page. But if you don't establish that same common space, then they're going to be like, no, you don't understand why I did it this way.
Man, where were you like 5 years ago? Like, I think I've hurt a lot of feelings, building a product or a company or a strategy where I'm like, no, that's dumb. We're not going to do it, so that's amazing advice.
I learned it by like hurting people's feelings first, probably. And then learning, especially as I started managing people, it's a lot easier when it's somebody that you work with and you can be like, oh, I don't like your idea, it's stupid. But then when you manage people, you don't want to tell somebody you manage, like, I think your idea is stupid. And so trying to figure out like that balance.
Or sometimes you want to. I mean, like, I think I just have less self-control, but yes, I hear what you're saying. I love that. So Kat, you've had in your career, you've been very early employee to like massive company and really kind of grown as a leader. And what does that journey look like to you personally?
I mean, it's a lot. It's just a lot of learning. I was laughing as Kaela was speaking because everything she said, you don't want to do, like I did those things, right? Yeah. Especially early in my career as a manager and inherently therefore a leader, I felt that my role in leadership was to be the one who was unquestionable, who knew everything, who was setting the path, right? And so that led to very bad behavior of not listening. My opinion trumped all. I would tell people if I didn't believe that their thoughts or actions aligned to that plan, right? Like I was quite aggressive in leadership and it didn't work. I got a pretty scathing 360 review my first time as a director, but it was so incredibly helpful because it actually made me reset and listen, to think about what my role was as a leader. And soon, as I continued to grow as an executive, it very much flipped the script for me that my job was as offensive line. It was no longer to be the one doing the work or to have all of the right answers. I didn't need to have all the right answers. I needed to listen and look across the team and hear what they were working to tell me and to support them and help to realign them, rather than I set the path and therefore they march, So listening really just became the core part of the job, that if I wasn't paying attention to the teams that I supported or the clients that we were lucky to sell into, we would be missing something. And so that's really what the path looked like, was a lot of failure and not listening, and growing through listening and failing and growing and failing and growing, and on it goes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, so now here you are in a situation where you're seeing founders and hearing from founders all the time. Yeah. And I've been in that seat, where, you've got a certain amount of time, maybe, half an hour to hour to really impress this VC so that they will take a second meeting with you and then, and hopefully be interested enough to invest in your company. So what are when you're spending that much time with, such a short amount of time, can you make judgments whether or not they're good leaders at that moment? And if you can, like, what are those qualities that you're looking for?
I can identify whether someone is a great storyteller and can rally people to the mission, and purpose of their organization. That's something that I do believe you can get out very, very quickly just by watching how people pitch. And so that's something I look for in every founder that we then go on to back, is, are they good at storytelling, articulating, their view of the company today, But also I look for their recognition of what they know and what they don't know in that first meeting. So are they one that was like me as an early director who asserts that they know everything and they've got it under control, and it's going to be a big hit to their ego and painful for organization as they realize that that isn't true? Or are they very cognizant of their strengths, building towards their strengths, and then hiring and recruiting to weakness? Those are the two big things that I look for in initial meeting. And if I can at least sense that, then I'm digging in, beyond and into the business. But above all else, I'm assessing the founder in that initial meeting for those two things.
So it's not always about it's having all the right answers, but maybe like a little self-awareness, like where they might be
Oh yeah,
weak.
I like to ask questions that I know they won't know to see how they respond. I did that in interviewing as well. A trap just to see what they say when they don't know, especially if you're a venture-backed company who, anticipates exit through IPO or otherwise. Your ability to acknowledge and state the things that you don't know to your team, to investors, to the market, maybe eventually, like that's a very, very important trait. So very much am I assessing for that, but I did that, as I was hiring for roles at Degree as well.
So as long as I've known you, you've had this very strategic and analytical mind, where it is having a business conversation with you is like playing chess, because you are anticipating, these conversations, and it's fascinating to hear how your mind works and see it in play. So the much utmost respect for you on that. So Kaela, so let's say you're in a situation where, and maybe you've had this, but actually we probably have all had that. It's where an employee is unhappy, and that requires, but you're unhappy with them. What does that process look like to finding, doing the listening and then also leading and helping this employee?
Yeah. I think that whenever you're like unhappy with an employee or they're underperforming or something, like, again, it comes back to that listening. If they're whether it's on a specific project or on a bigger scale of like their overall performance, a lot of it starts with trying to ask those same questions of, hey, like, tell me how you feel about this thing that you did, how, like, sometimes they're just gonna be like, yeah, I thought it sucked, like, and
Yeah.
you're like, okay, cool. Like, I don't have to tell you it sucked. Like, let's go from there, and what, like, why do you think it didn't go well? And like, what parts of it or whatever. But if they think it did go well, then you can try to figure out like what parts did they think went well, and you can start to compliment them on that part and be like, okay, and then what about this specific piece, and start to dig in there. But another piece, is also then, being able to, once you establish that, being able to like agree like on the things that they are doing well, or like agree on whatever it is that you do, and then build on like whatever it is that you have on common, and like wherever the gaps are that you see, and then like compare those perspectives or like options, so that you're not ever just like, being able to you're not using right and wrong. You're not accusing them. It's just like, cool. So like, we agree this part was awesome. It sounds like we agree that maybe there was a gap here. Here's some suggestions or whatever. And you can kind of like walk them through a process instead of it just coming out of the blue. Like, and then always like bringing in those suggestions about how to improve that, being able to make it like, oh, like, if you're concerned about a specific area, asking them like, how will this address X? Or I'm a little concerned about this thing. How do you think we should handle that? Or what have you explored related to this? Always like asking like what and how or where or when questions. Usually like why questions always put people on the defensive. If you say like, why did you do that? Then they're immediately like, oh shit, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
You know, if you keep prodding that, then it'll force them to go through the thinking process of finding the issues with the work that they did or coming up with the solutions. And the goal for you as a manager should be to help them find the solutions themselves rather than to tell them the answer, because they're never going to grow if you're just giving them the answers. And then obviously if you have to give them really critical feedback of like, no, you're really not cutting it, being able to make it clear what the repercussions are of their actions. So not just being like, you need to show up to work on time, or you need to like not do this thing or do this thing or whatever, but being able to say, hey, when you do this, it has this consequence on your teammates. And, you know, that's not great for these reasons. So I would appreciate it if you change your behavior in this ways. And then, you know, that will have this impact on the whole team in making it more successful. And so when you structure it that way, then it's helps people understand, oh, my team's going to be more successful, or they're going to like me more, or I'm going to be able to succeed in my career. And so I've always loved it when my bosses said, hey, if you frame your feedback in the executive meetings in this way, then the execs are going to take it better. And I've been like, oh, great. Like, I want the execs to like me more and to like take the things I say. And so then I get excited when I'm getting that feedback instead of like, oh, my boss is telling me I'm doing something wrong. You know?
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, you know, so I think a lot of times when, and maybe I've had this situation many times where like you're in a conversation with someone and you guys we walk away with like totally different interpretations of what that conversation was. And you're like, and the way people listen and what they hear, you know, can be so different. So, you know, there's been times where like with certain people, I've always had to follow up with an email after a conversation and said, just to be clear, here's what we talked about, here's what we agreed on, and all that. But I mean, that also feels like work. And sometimes I think listening is a lot of, well, it is work, you know, it's extra work, you know. Kat, why do you even think that? Because we're in a situation where it's like, if we don't like them, they can go and we can get someone else, you know, everybody's disposable. Why do you think listening should be a part of, you know, management and all that?
I think leadership broadly needs to be intentional. Listening is active. You don't listen passively, right? You have to actively be listening, and otherwise you miss stuff. And I think just that approach of being intentional in everything that you do in your role as leader, no matter what capacity that's in, if it's at work, if it's at home, if it's, you know, in the community, it has to be intentional. And listening, especially so, needs to be intentional. And, you know, I loved how you talked about misunderstandings and how they can happen in daily conversation at work, etc. That's just like, why does misunderstanding happen? Because if you're only listening to the words that are said, you're going to interpret them a certain way and go off, you know, and act accordingly. But listening means you're looking beyond the behavior and the words that are said to understand the drive and the motivations behind those words. You know, that's what active listening means, is you're not just ingesting the words, you're also ingesting the nuance and the person behind those words. And that is very hard work. As a leader, as an executive, I'd end the day just mentally exhausted, not because I had actually done anything in terms of output, but because I had spent the entirety of my day in calls, whether that be in the teams that I supported or with clients. And I was just listening for the story behind the story, you know, what was really happening. The other thing that happens, I think, when you are in a position of leadership, is that people tell you what they believe you want to hear. And so you need to listen for, you know, what's actually happening behind that the good news narrative that they often want to bring. You know, news is always put through a rosy filter when it's being brought to someone who's in a position of leadership. And, you know, you have to be actively listening to cut through the rose-colored glasses to find the reality of a situation.
That is a really good point. Kayla, what were you gonna say?
Well, so I think the other thing is, you know, when you listen, it's actually saves you way more time and effort later on by just like asking a few of the right questions up front, that then if you're listening and getting those answers, if you're asking the right things, everything else goes smoother and easier. And so I like to use this, what I call like rule of three. I think I might have gotten it from Never Split the Difference, which is a great book for anyone who hasn't read it. But basically the first thing is you try to get somebody to say yes, like okay, so we agree that we're going to do X. And then they would go, yes. A lot of people just stop there and they're like, cool, we agree at the end. But then the second thing is you say, okay, when are we going to do that? Or how are we going to do it? Or where? Or who's going to do it? And then by asking like follow-up questions, you force them to kind of say additional things, and it's basically they're saying yes again, they're adding additional detail, and it's harder for them to agree to that just in that passive, like Kat was saying, say what they want the exec to say or to hear, if they didn't really agree to it. And so you'll start discovering if there were concerns or issues as you ask those questions, and then like following up with that written email or confirmation of, okay, we agreed that like so-and-so is going to do this at this time or date or in this way. Then, you know, it's now like bound and, you know,
Yes.
they've had multiple chances. And so when I'm giving people assignments or tasks, I try to ask a lot of questions of, hey, do you know what you need to do in order to do this successfully? Or do you know what success looks like even for this task? Or do you have what you need to be successful? What help do you want from me on this? You know, what concerns do you have about this project? And by asking those questions up front, then they can't just go like, yeah, cool, I got it. And then they like 5 minutes after the call, they're like, shit, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Right. And, you know, it forces all of those out so that then they actually will get it done. They'll know how to do it. I know if they need help, I know the right amount to help them. So I'm not being a micromanager, but I'm also not like being too hands off. And then like, it's actually, I have confidence it's going to get done instead of like 3 weeks later and they're like, they either haven't done it or they've done it like terribly and now we've got to like do it all over again and we're behind schedule or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think it's great. I'm definitely gleaning to ask a lot of questions, so because that helps people think of a response. And so it's just like a little bit more than the thumbs up, I've got it, and making sure, and it's almost that double check. I need to do this with my kids. So do you understand what I just told you to do? But I want to dive, I think you guys both have really fascinating careers. Both of you have had a career change in the last little bit, from Kat going from corporate to VC, and Kaela, you at a fast growing company and now doing a startup and kind of at the co-founder ground zero. I can imagine that imposter syndrome is real.
Very real.
Yes. Yeah, all the time, but what advice do you have? Like, why did you guys listen to that career change? Because the safe thing to do is stay where you're at, why did you guys think about doing a career change?
Yeah, I think, one is I get really bored if I'm not growing. And so I always want to be growing and learning new things and progressing, and new challenges are fun and exciting. So that's part of it, but they are terrifying. When I decided to make the switch, I from podium to paintbrush, I had the biggest panic attack I've ever had in my life. I was terrified I was going to disappoint my co-founder. I was terrified I was leaving behind a great opportunity. I like everything about it was terrifying. So everything, like, imposter syndrome is a very real thing in, my entire career. I think that one of the things that's important is just to remember that you don't have to know how to do everything, and you're not supposed to know how to do everything. Like Kat said, like she explicitly asked questions to try to make sure that you don't think you know how to do everything, because if you do, then you're probably an idiot who's overconfident. A lot of it's about, can you figure out how to get to the answer? And a lot of times figuring out how to get to the answer is being willing to ask people and ask questions and show that you don't know. And it sounds weird, but the way to fix the imposter syndrome is by showing that you're an imposter. Like you have to say, hey, I have no idea how to do this. Who can help me? And then you learn how to do it. But if you won't admit that you don't know how to do it, then you're never going to figure it out. And that was something that I screwed up a lot when I was early in my career. I didn't want people to know that I didn't know how to do marketing as well as I thought I should. I was the first marketing person at Reddit. And I was like, oh, I should know everything. I didn't have anyone inside the company that was better at marketing than me, that I had a boss that could be telling me what to do. And so I didn't want to tell them that I was like, I don't know this, don't fire me though. And I didn't want to ask other marketing people outside of the company that were like big fancy marketing directors, or because I was like, they'll know within 3 minutes that I'm an idiot and like not worthy to be talking to them. And so I just kept doing it all by trial and error and made way more mistakes than I should have if I just asked for help. And so it's just ask for help, admit what you don't know, and it actually makes you look smarter and cooler. Believe it or not, I've always, like, whenever I've met people who would say like, oh, I don't know what that is. Like, I actually always were like, oh, they're really cool. Like, they're smart. They're way more confident than I am, because they can admit that. Like, there are lots of things Beyonce doesn't know. Like, she's really cool and good at things, but she's too busy doing really cool shit to bother knowing about like other things. Like, she probably doesn't know how to do her taxes, and like she's not ashamed to admit that, because like, why would she bother knowing how to do that when so like, admit what you don't know. You're busy doing other cool stuff.
I love that like admitting that you don't know something is like a form of confidence. Being able to be like, I don't know, what are you gonna do? You're gonna show me. So what about you, Kat, from the switch to company to VC, which sounds like the most, I mean, when I was raising money, I would have loved to have been in your seat, making those decisions.
Well, first, my takeaway from today is going to be that I am like Beyonce, because I also don't know how to do my taxes. The thing that we have learned today. But my career arc, it really does come back to listening. Like, I grew up on a cattle ranch, never saw, didn't have that 50-year plan of where I wanted to end up. It's really just a set of stories around, I was in the right place at the right time, and I was paying attention and listening, and an opportunity presented itself to me. That was true for my opportunity to join Degreed, but it's also true, as I make this transition over to venture, that I had been going to breakfast with a friend, and he heard me say that I really loved being a part of a venture-backed company, and I'd had such great experiences with my investors that I one day would like to be on the other side of the table when the time was right. And he's well connected in the community, and he let a few of the partners that he's able to work with know that, hey, I think I might be open to making a career change if you reached out to her. So him listening to me in that moment, and then as Kickstart approached me. I've been getting to know the team here for 3+ years, just listening to them, how they approach building the ecosystem here in Utah, how they approach supporting founders that they are lucky to fund. That's really what drew me here, is I just found that they do a lot of active listening. And what they're listening for is not just companies that can help them to generate a return, but it's companies that they believe can make an impact. And I find a lot of value in that, and feel lucky to be joining the team. And I also think that, all of the capabilities I've been lucky to develop in my time, throughout my career, and especially at Degreed, being a venture-backed company, being able to apply those on the other side of the table. Because as you said, Sunny, when you're on the founder side, you look to the day where you'll be able to be the one, that isn't making stupid decisions like saying no to you. They'd be the ones that will fund. Yeah, it's a lot. It's been really just an exceptional experience being on that other side and getting to know, the inner workings, especially at Kickstart, but also just of the business of venture capital.
Yeah, I will tell you, one of my first pitches was to Kickstart. And I remember Gavin being in the room, probably Dalton was in the room. And I had not really pitched before. So it was kind of like a trial. And Gavin said something that stuck with me. He said, "So you're a startup based on another startup." And that's all he said. And I walked out of that meeting going, good God, he's right. And that's awful. I better build a product that is not dependent on another startup. And I was very grateful for that, because, as a brand new person, I hadn't realized how it sounded on the other side. And so I am always grateful that Gavin, I don't think he even realized it. And he was like, he could have said, "You idiot," at the end, but he was just so gracious. and really helpful in that. So we've got a couple questions here. I'm gonna do this. So how this wasn't meant to be like a women's focused panel. It just ended up that we just had great women to have talk about this topic. But how has specifically being a woman in positions of power impacted your leadership styles, and how do you interact with peers in your field with that burden of being a woman, I should say? So Kaela, you want to go first? Yeah.
No, I can. I'll go first. I'll take it. Initially, I felt like we are treated differently as women, or I would say, people of color in leadership roles. Often we are the other or the only in a room. So even though there's very rarely is it overt bias that's being directed our way, there's a lot of unconscious, because you are the only person in that room. Mm-hmm. And initially I thought it was, it always put me on my heels, and I would get defensive, and therefore I was not leading to the best of my capability. As I learned to just acknowledge the realities that existed and the types of biases that would be directed towards me, I was on offense towards them instead of being on defense and reacting to them. And I felt a tidal shift in the ways in which I was able to support my team, as I was actively on offense against those biases and leading in awareness of them, as opposed to reacting to them one-to-one as they came in. I am a better leader when I am not defensive, and I would say that is true of everyone. And so as an only in a room, that is something that I would encourage people to be intentional about. But I also, there is opportunity in being the only. There is opportunity in immediately having visibility in a room of other people, and being able to leverage that to accomplish whatever mission it is you have in said room. That is a superpower. And so rather than feeling like I was a recipient of bias when I, at least inside of my mind, turned the table on that, where I was on the offense and using it to my advantage to accomplish my goals. That's made all of the difference for me. It doesn't mean that there's not moments that really piss me off, but it does give me at least the feeling of more power in said moments.
Right. Yeah, that's great. What about you, Kaela?
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, like, I've had a really lucky career for most of the time. I've worked with phenomenal people. I've experienced personally very little discrimination. But I think that what has become really powerful as I've moved into leadership roles is I've been in a place where I'm able to stop other people from experiencing that discrimination. And when you're just like one person out of many, you maybe don't see things at a systemic level and you're not able to affect those changes. But as you move up, like, you're able to see and be aware of those things and say, hey, what if we change the way we're doing this? Or what if we change the way we talk about these things? Or we're thinking about this or whatever. And, that's not something that's unique to women being able to do it. But like Kat said, sometimes we are a little bit more aware of those things because we are used to being a little bit more discriminated against. So we're a little bit more aware of, like, how is this affecting me and how's it affecting other people of color or LGBTQ plus people or anybody else with disabilities, whatever else. And so thinking about that is something that's a little bit more present in mind. There are a lot of, people who do great at that, who are not women, who are not minorities. So that's not unique to us. But I've been in executive meetings where I was the only woman, the only person under 40, and the only person who was not of a certain religious or persuasion, and had to like cut off conversations and just say, we can't keep talking. This is literally illegally HR inappropriate. Like, stop right now. Stop. Like, no, really stop. Like, and, and that, like, that can be uncomfortable to be the only person in the room who like doesn't match on like several criteria and be like literally yelling at the rest of the room to like stop a conversation.
Right.
That, like, I know that me doing that in that room makes the entire rest of the company safer. And so it's like worth doing that. And it's exciting to be able to have that influence.
Yeah, I think there's been times when, I felt like I was in a good position to say something, like push back on something. And even though no one said anything before, where someone will come, inevitably and be like, thank you so much. I was so uncomfortable, and so, sometimes you do have allies, even though it's not always there present. Another question we got is, what is one thing you learned from someone who is that worked for you in your organization and that you've kept with you or shaped you as a leader? So maybe like an employee or someone that you've had that you've learned a lesson from them.
I feel like I've learned so many things from everyone I've worked with. It's hard to. I like. I've learned this from a few different people, but I'm very like business or oriented. I like to just be like, all right, what are we doing? Like, and I'm like really excited about whatever we're working on. And I sometimes forget to like forget that the people I'm working with are also people, which sounds really, really terrible. That like when I'm in one-on-ones, I like am just like, okay, how's this going? And how's this going? And what are we doing here? And some of the people I've worked with, the entire first 15 minutes that we're talking, they're just like, and how was your weekend? And like, what about this? And like, how's your dog doing? And like all of these things. And it's like, oh yeah, that was nice and that was fun. And I should do that more with other people I talk to. And just like remembering that to build those friendships with the people you work with too, especially as so many companies have gone remote. That was something that I had to become really conscious of doing, because you miss out on the like water cooler talk in between meetings of where you're just like joking around and talking about life outside of the meetings. All the interactions you have are the meetings. And so we started consciously making time at the beginning of meetings to just like talk about fun stuff and incorporate that in, because we wanted to make sure people still had those relationships with their coworkers and enjoyed working with those people. And you trust and can collaborate with those people better as you get to know them. And so making sure that you have room to do that instead of just jumping straight to the business stuff, and that it's not only okay, but it is actually productive and useful to do that. And it's not a waste of time to just be like finding out like about their favorite TV show or what they did that weekend.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Kat, what about you? What have you learned from a previous employee or anyone that's worked with you?
Oh my goodness, more than I can possibly state. And that's why I feel so lucky to have had the coworkers and the leaders that I have. Is every day is a learning experience. And I think that's quite special. The thing that stuck with me as I left Degreed above all else was, the notes and the messages that I got had nothing to do with my business acumen or the execution in the company that we built. Every note that I got was about some small moment of interaction where, as humans, we engaged one-to-one and people felt seen and noticed. And that is what they carried with them in their memory of me as I left Degreed. It wasn't that we, nailed a quarter or closed a client. It was always the personal interactions and just, as Kaela stated, the humanity of us as humans and how we engage, and that we prioritize that as much as we prioritize, our execution. And that I think brings us back to just how important it is to listen. And often it wasn't anything that I did. I was just there in a moment to, support someone through something that was quite human indeed. So.
Yeah. And I always tell this story, but one of the first, I went to lunch with Kat. I had just found out that I was pregnant. She was one of the first persons I told. I didn't know Kat very well, but I was so freaked out in my mind. And I said, I'm pregnant. And she said, it'll be okay. And I am forever grateful because I didn't have anywhere to turn. I didn't feel like I could tell my team. I didn't feel like I could tell my co-founder. I didn't feel like I could tell my investors. I certainly couldn't tell customers, and like Kat just happened to be that person. So I was grateful that she listened to me and provided that comfort. So this basically wraps it up, but I just want to thank you guys. I think we're so incredibly lucky to have the both of you in our community, in the Utah tech community. I think you guys offer such great perspectives, and you have this legacy of a career that is so impressive. So we're excited to see what you guys do with Kickstart and Paintbrush, and as you guys continue to grow and continue to teach us all the great lessons that you've learned. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.